All right, today Kaf Zayin, Amud Aleph. We're going to start. We went towards the middle of the page already. We were already at Amar Abaye right in the middle. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines down from the top where it says Amar Abaye. So basically what we had here was a machloket between Abaye and Rava regarding is there a machloket or not? Because we talked about the issue of tzemer upishtim, wool and linen, everybody agrees, is subject to tum'ah, even if it's only 3 fingers by 3 fingers. And Abaye said that everybody agrees that other fabrics, other materials, are not subject to tum'ah. Rava said, no, there's really a machloket that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that other fabrics can be subject to tum'ah if they are 3 by 3 tefachim, if they're larger. That was the machloket, and so we had a little bit of a tussling between Abaye and Rava on the top of this amud, where they tried to show from Pesukim, okay, where do you get your idea? Where do you get yours? What is Abaye going to do with that pasuk? What is Rava going to do with that pasuk? And that's where we ended off, was with the back and forth about how they interpret various Pesukim to support their positions. So now it says, Amar Abaye says, Hi, Tana Dve Rabbi Yishmael Mapik Meidach Tana Dve Rabbi Yishmael. I'll admit to you that this statement of the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael contradicts another statement from the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, because it says, Beged Enli. Because Tanei Dve Rabbi Yishmael, because the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael said, Beged, it says the word Beged, Enli Ela Beged, Tzemer Upishtim. All I know is that a garment of Tzemer Upishtim, wool or linen, is going to be subject to Tum'ah. Minayim the Rabot Tzemer Gemalim, Tzemer Arnavim, Notza Shalizim, Vashirayin Vakalach. How do I know that even the wool of rabbits, or the wool from camels, or the hair from goats, or various types of silk, vasarikin, these are all different types of silk. These last 3 things, vashirain, vakalach, vasarikin. Talmud lamar, o beged. So as we said above, o beged is an inclusive term that comes to expand the category, and therefore all of these other things, the goat hair and the silk, etc., is subject to tum'ah based on this word o beged. Now wait a second, Abaye himself was the one that said before that everybody agrees that other fabrics and materials are not subject to tum'ah, but now he's coming along and saying that actually there is an opinion even within Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva. Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva was the one that said that there isn't any tum'ah beyond wool and linen. But even Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva itself has a teaching that supports the idea that other bigadim are also subject to tum'ah from the word obeged. So,
just one clarification.
Yeah, sure.
In this discussion of tum'ah that they're having, are they taken into consideration during the Bet Hamikdash or not during the Bet Hamikdash?
Well, tum'ah, in reality, tum'ah always applies. It's just not significant to us today. In other words, things still become tameh today. The halachot still apply, just that we don't observe them. Right.
In the context of this conversation,
it's theoretical, the conversation.
Oh, so it's only theoretical.
Yeah.
So in other words, it doesn't matter.
I mean, they're not observing the laws of tum'ah v'tahara at that time, but they're concerned about the halachot because you study every.
Which means that we're talking about any tum'ah at any level.
Right, at any level.
During or
whether or not it applies practically, let's say, whether or not it has any practical implication. Although if they had terumah around or maaser, it would be an issue. So Rava says, Ki let le lahachtanat Rabbi Yishmael bishar begadim shalosh al shalosh shalosha itlei. So Rava comes along and says, okay, Abaye is saying that what you have here is you have 2 different versions of Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva. The first one said that tzemer upishtim is the only thing, that only wool and linen are subject to tum'ah, and that was the one that Abaye said was the definitive one, right? Because that was what Abaye was saying. Rava had already said there was a machloket between Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and the Tana Dve Rabbi Yishmael. But in that machloket, it was Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that was the one that expanded the category and said that other fabrics are also subject to tum'ah. And it was Tana Dve Rabbi Yishmael that was saying that it wasn't subject to tum'ah, that only tzemer upishtim, that only wool and linen were subject. So Rava comes along and says now, no, that really the teacher from the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael Bishar Begedim Shalosha Shalosh Shalosha Shalosha Idle, that even the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael is going to say that when you have 3 tefachim by 3 tefachim, all fabrics are included. Really? That's what he's going to say? But Rava this whole time has been telling us that was the whole machloket. That Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar held that other bigadim, true, they are only subject to tumah if they are larger, but they are subject to tumah, and the yeshiva of Rabbi Shimon was saying that they're not subject at all. So how can he now reverse and say, no. The yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael accepts the idea that other bigadim, that other fabrics are subject to tumah, as long as they're 3 by 3 tefachim. So he's contradicting himself. He's now saying that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael are agreeing, not disagreeing. So in fact, that's true. Hadar be Rava me'ahi. That Rava retracted his original view and went back to say that, you know what, everybody agrees, but they agree to something different than what Abaye said they agree. Because Abaye said that everybody agrees that only wool and linen are subject to tum'ah, and that this additional opinion is another opinion. In other words, the first 2 opinions agreed that only wool and linen were subject to tum'ah, and then you find this other braita here where there's a second view. But now Rava is saying, no, in the original machloket, in the original statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, you were right, Abaye, they are agreeing. I agree with you now, they were agreeing. Except what they were agreeing was something different. Not that tum'ah is not relevant to other fabrics. It is relevant, just that there's a different shi'ur, there's a larger measurement for other fabrics than there is for wool and linen. So now Rava is coming back and agreeing with Abaye that actually there is no machloket, but he's arguing with him about what they agree on. Okay, so that's where Rava is standing now.
So I want to understand. So the machloket it's about only tzemer pishtin, and the other
everybody agrees.
All the other materials.
Right, except that exactly. Right.
So
that's what they're saying now.
So what's the end of the?
Oh, we're not done yet. When we get to the end, we'll see. So now, ve'ibait ema, possibly we could say harav papa amara, that really this was stated by Rav Papa. In other words, when we said before that Rava came along and made a distinction about the like Rashi says here, ve'ibait ema, that this statement that is lav Rava amara. It wasn't Rava. I'm reading from Rashi for a second. Ela Rav Papa amara lokmei tarvaihu tirei tanaed Rabbi Yishmael kahadadeh velememar demodeh tanad reisha deish too much shratim b'shar begadim. In other words, what he means is that maybe Rava remained with his original view that according to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael there is no tum'ah for other begadim. But Rav Papa was the one who came along and said that there is. Okay, so now we're stepping away from Rava for a second. So and how did that work? Because Rav Papa Amar Af Kol La Tuyei Kilayim. Because what will Rav Papa say? He'll go back to what we said before. What does Af Kol mean? Because we read before that Tanat Vei Rabbi Yishmael, what did they say? Just like it says Beged Tzemer or Beged Pishtim, Af Kol Tzemer or Pishtim, right? That was what they said before, meaning that just like the example given in the Torah is wool and linen, that means that all is wool and linen. Af kol tzemer upishtim. So he's saying af kol wasn't talking about purity and impurity. That's not what it meant. That was talking about kilayim, meaning that what kinds of fabrics can you not mix in a garment? Only wool and linen. You want to mix cotton with silk? That's okay. That's what Rav Papa was saying, that when the Shiva of Rabbi Yishmael said that just like it mentions wool and linen, that means it's always wool and linen, they didn't mean that the only thing that is subject to tum'ah is wool and linen. What they meant was that the only thing that's subject to kilayim, that's subject to shatnez, is wool and linen. But wait a second, kilayim behedya ketiveh. How can Rav Papa say that we need a special statement from Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva to tell us that the only fabrics you're not allowed to mix are wool and linen? That's in the Torah. You don't need Rabbi Yishmael to tell you that. Because Rav Papa says that if you read the Torah, you would say you can't make a garment out of wool and linen. But maybe, if you wanted to make a blanket, Because it only says lo tilbash shatnez, right? Tzemer upishtim. So maybe if you wanted to make a garment to wear it, only wool and linen are prohibited. But if you wanted to make a blanket, maybe even cotton and linen wouldn't be allowed.
Or towel.
Or something else that you put on you, not clothing. So wait, the Gemara says, "Velav kal v'chomer u'mal levisha dekam mitanek kulei gufei mikilai amrat tzemer upishtim in midi achrina lo ha'ala'a lo kol sheken." But wait a second. If we know that when it comes to wearing a garment where the whole body is protected, only wool and linen are prohibited to be mixed, certainly any other covering of the body, which is not covering your entire body, like a little blanket or a towel or something like that, is not going to be subject to, it's not going to go beyond wool or linen. Where would we come to think that anything beyond wool and linen would be a concern? So the Gemara says, "Ela de Rav Papa badutahi." Rather, what Rav Papa said was totally wrong. It was an off-the-cuff statement, and we reject that statement. So that's not a valid interpretation of Rabbi Ishmael. So we're still stuck. One statement of Rabbi Ishmael said that, just like it says, "Beged tzemer upishtim, af kol tzemer upishtim," that the only thing we're concerned about is wool and linen, and the other statement said that "o beged" comes to include other begadim. So can we reconcile these in some way? So one way is to say that it's just two different opinions in Rabbi Ishmael, which is what Abaye said. The other possibility is to reconcile the two. So we can't reconcile it the way Rav Papa did. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, "Af kol la'atuyeh tzitzit." That Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, what was Rabbi Ishmael saying? Really, when it comes to purity and impurity, they're going to say that all bigadim are subject to purity and impurity. That wasn't what they meant. When they said af kol, just like tzemer upishtim is what's mentioned in the Torah when we're talking about tzara'at, so too, af kol, tzemer upishtim means tzitzit. That the only bigadim, the only garments that are subject to tzitzit, according to the Torah, are wool and linen garments. Tzitzit behed yakitiv. But isn't even this idea also written in the Torah? Because it says lo tilbash shatnez tzemer upishtim. Because it says don't wear shatnez, wool and linen together, and then it says uchtib gilim taselach. Then it says make tzitzit. So the meaning is that the same garments we're talking about that you're not allowed to mix are the garments that require tzitzit, which are wool and linen. That's what Rabbi Ishmael's yeshiva was trying to teach me. Why do I need that? It's in the pasuk. Salka datachamina ke Rava, because you might have gone along with Rava's interpretation. De Rava Rami, because Rava raises the following problem. Ketiv hakanaf min kanaf. It says al tzitzira kanaf petil techelet. You should put on the tzitzira kanaf on. The tzitzit kanaf means that the tzitzit of the corner. What does that mean? Min kanaf. That whatever the color of the garment is what the color of the tzitzit is supposed to be. In other words, and whatever it's made of is what the tzitzit is supposed to be made of. So what does that mean? Uchtiv, but then it says tzemer ufishtim yachadav. Then it says wool and linen together. In other words, there's a contradiction, because on one hand it would seem to say that only wool and linen are able to be used for tzitzit. But it says min kanaf. Min kanaf means whatever garment you're wearing, you're supposed to make tzitzit that are of the same nature as the garment. So if you have a cotton garment, it should be cotton tzitzit. If you have a silk garment, it should be silk tzitzit. But it also says that tzemer upishtim is mentioned, so that would imply that only wool and linen. So how did Rava resolve this? Haketzat tzemer upishtim potrin b'minan ben shelo b'minan, shar minin b'minan potrin shelo b'minan en potrin. So what did Rava say? Rava said that the way you resolve it is like this: that wool and linen tzitzit could work on anything. If you have a cotton garment, you can put wool tzitzit on it. You have a silk garment, put wool tzitzit on it. No problem. But cotton tzitzit are only valid on a cotton garment. Silk tzitzit are only valid on a silk garment. You can't take silk tzitzit and put them on a cotton garment. You can't put cotton tzitzit on a silk garment. You can't put cotton tzitzit on a wool garment. But wool tzitzit and linen tzitzit can be affixed to any garment. But what is the presupposition of Rava here? That all garments, though, are subject to tzitzit. It's just a question of what kind of tzitzit you use. Do you use the tzitzit that are the same fabric as the garment, or do you use wool and linen tzitzit? And he resolves it by saying wool and linen tzitzit are the universally good. You can use them on any garment. But cotton tzitzit are only good for a cotton garment. Silk tzitzit only good for a silk garment. That's how Rava resolves it. But he's presupposing that all garments are subject to tzitzit. So what does it mean? So you might have thought like Rava's position, Kamash Malan, therefore Tanad Devei Rabbi Yishmael was trying to tell us that just like it mentions with Tumat Negaim, with the Tumat Tzara'at, only Beged Tzemer or Beged Pishtim, it only mentions wool and linen garments, so to Afkol Tzemer or Pishtim, so too the only garments that are subject to tzitzit are wool or linen garments. That's the way that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak resolves the problem. Amar Rav Acha bar Rava. Rav Acha bar Rava said, "L'Ravashi l'Tanad v'Rav Yishmael." So he said to Rava. He said to Rava. Amar Rav Acha bar Rava l'Ravashi. So Rav Acha the son of Rava said to Ravashi, "L'Tanad v'Rav Yishmael, Mai shena le'inyan tumad mirabbe shar begadim dechtivo beged." So why is it though, now that you're coming to this, that you've resolved the problem by saying that Rabbi Yishmael, when they were talking about other garments being included, they were talking about tum'ah. When it comes to tum'ah, really, now we're saying that according to Rabbi Yishmael, all garments are subject. Then why is it that by tzitzit, because it says it says that you should put tzitzit, fringes or braids, gidilimar, on the four corners of whatever garment you cover yourself with. So asher techaseba means any garments. Why don't we generalize? You're generalizing because it says oh beged, and you're going to come along and ignore the fact that it says tzemer upishtim explicitly and say, oh, that's just an example, wool and linen, and really any garment is subject to tum'ah. So why don't we say the same thing by tzitzit and expand the category with tzitzit as well? So what does he say? He says no. Because we already used the word asher techaseba for something else, to include a blind person and obligate a blind person in tzitzit. Because hudata, right? It comes to include the clothing of a blind person. Titanias, we learned in a Braita. It says you shall see the tzitzit parat lechsut laila, which comes to exclude a nighttime garment. This either means, according to many Rishonim, it means whatever you wear at night, even if it's a talit, is not obligated in tzitzit, because there's no mitzvah of tzitzit at night. That's how the Rambam says, that's how the Shulchan Aruch says. Then there's the position of Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh, who say that, no, it's a ksud laila. That means any garment which is designated for nighttime, like a pajama garment, a pajama cloak, would be patur from tzitzit. But even if you wore it during the day, and a talit, even at night, since the talit is made for daytime use, it would be obligated in tzitzit even at night. That's a different opinion.
So they hold that you actually have to sleep in?
So for example, if you were to put on your talit, let's say on Yom Kippur night,
you would
say the bracha. Right.
But do you have to sleep with it?
So they say that you're actually, I don't think so, because when you're sleeping you can't really be obligated in a mitzvah, but I guess, if you're wearing it at night, you'd have to wear it. Yeah. So okay, so Ata Omer Prad Chsut Laila, you're telling me that Uritemoto, you should see it, tells me that there's no mitzvah of tzitzit at night. Maybe Uritemoto, you should see it, means a blind person is exempt from tzitzit, because it says he has to see it. No, because we already have a pasuk that says asher techaseba, whatever you cover yourself with, you have to put on tzitzit, which implies that even a blind person who can't see it has to do it. So So what does it mean, uritemoto? What does it mean you should see the tzitzit? It's not coming to exclude a blind person's garment, it's coming to exclude a nighttime garment. Why do you slice it that way? In other words, why do you decide that the pasuk that's more inclusive is going to include the blind person's garment, and the pasuk that says you have to see it is going to exclude a nighttime garment? Why don't you instead say the opposite? Say that the one that says you have to see it is excluding a blind person, and the one that says asher techaseba, that anything that you wear is including a nighttime garment. How do you know? So he says, "Mirabe'ani kisut tzuma sheyeshna b'riya etzel achirim, u'motziani kisut laila sheyna b'riya etzel achirim." What is the answer? He says that true, that we could have done it the other way, but I prefer to include the blind person's garment, because a blind person's garment, true that he can't see it, but it can be seen. But a nighttime garment at night, it can't be seen by anybody, blind or not. So that's why we exclude a nighttime garment, but we include a sumah. Why can't asher techaseh ba come along to include other garments besides wool and linen, instead of including the blind person's garment? Mistabrad kai betzemer upishtim merabeh tzemer upishtim kai betzemer upishtim merabeh shar begadim. So what he says is that when we're talking about tzemer upishtim, okay, when we're talking about the issue of tzemer upishtim, so where does Rashi explain it? 1 second. So he says on the side. So he says, "Kida'amar desamach tzemer upishtim legdilim mirabek sutzuma." In other words, since Asher Techaseh Ba comes right after the words Tzemer Upishtim, right after Shatnez, and then it says Asher Techaseh Ba, it wouldn't make any sense, the Gemara is saying, right after you just told me the limitation of Tzemer Upishtim, that it's wool and linen garments only, that you should then say Asher Techaseh Ba is going to include even other garments. Okay? So therefore, what is it including? It includes something within the category of Tzemer Upishtim. Namely, what's it going to include? A blind person's garments. So we don't want to say, okay, it tells me Tzemer Upishtim, and I'm going to generalize Asher Techaseh Ba, and I'm going to say that, no, all garments are included. We don't want to do that. We'll say, since you just told me it's only wool and linen garments that we're dealing with, because you just talked about Shatnez, so we're talking about wool and linen garments. So when you tell me Asher Techaseh Ba, that any garment that you cover yourself with is included in the mitzvah of tzitzit, I'm going to assume that you're talking about within the category of wool and linen that you just mentioned, not going beyond that category. Within that category, we're going to include also the garment of a blind person. Okay? But we're not going to say, but it's a rhetorical question. But when you just told me that it's wool and linen, we're restricting the mitzvah to wool and linen, and then you're going to say Asher Techaseh Ba, and you're going to cancel that out right afterwards? That wouldn't make any sense. So that's why we decided that only wool and linen. So what is the halacha from this sugya here? That's a blind person. That came in because they wanted to know why don't the words Asher Techaseh Ba include even cotton garments? Why doesn't it include silk garments? They said, because Asher Techaseh Ba means even if you can't see it, if you could be covered by it, even if you're blind, you can't see it, you still have to have tzitzit. So that's why they're mentioning it. But not to include more fabrics. So what's the halacha here? It's a machloket between the Rishonim. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, they come and they say that really mideoraita, mina Torah, only wool and linen garments require tzitzit. That's why we try to get a wool talit. If you can get a wool talit, you get a wool talit.
He also holds
midirabanan,
other people. It's not for other people to see. It's for you to see.
It's for you to see, right? But the wool. The cotton garments and silk garments, they also require tzitzit, but only midirabanan.
Wool itself.
Yeah, tzemer. So other opinions. There's another school of thought in the Rishonim that says no. We hold not like this way. We hold like the other way, that all garments are equally obligated in tzitzit, and therefore we would come down with the conclusion that cotton garments and silk garments are equally obligated min haTorah and tzitzit, and that's a machloket in the Shulchan Aruch between the Mechaber, Marana Bet Yosef, the Sephardic view in the Shulchan Aruch that says that wool and linen are the only ones that are biblically obligated in tzitzit, versus the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis in the Shulchan Aruch, who says that no, all garments are equally obligated. So if you have a silk talit or anything else, it's equally good. It's no better to have a wool talit according to the Ramah than it is to have a silk talit. But this is based on this sugya here. Amar Abaye says, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar v'Sumuchus amru davar echad. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Sumuchus said the same thing. The Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar had Amaran. We already said Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar earlier had said that not only is flax, when we had brought before, he said that it's mikabel tumah. It's the only thing that comes out of a tree that's mikabel tumah, and it's also the only thing that you can't use as sechach. Remember. So now, what does Sumuchus say? So it says, Sumuchus detani, as we learned in the Braita, Sumuchus omer sichacha betavui pesula b'pnei shemitama b'negaim. That even if all you had was the strings of pishtan, in other words, you had linen strings, that's enough that it can already be mekabel tum'ah because there's a special gezerat katuv with negaim, with tzara'at, that even the strings that are used for the vertical strings and the horizontal strings, like we mentioned yesterday, even the strings alone are subject to tum'ah, even if they're not woven into a garment yet. They're subject to tum'ah. So Sumchus is saying you cannot use those strings because they're mekabel tum'ah. So the chidush is that you might think that only something that's mekabel tum'ah in all realms of tum'ah would be a problem for sechach. Here, it's only subject to tum'ah of tzara'at. And yet, since it's subject to any tum'ah at all, under any circumstance, therefore you cannot use it as sechach, because the rule is that something that's mekabel tum'ah, you're not allowed to use for sechach on Sukkot.
Oh, right.
Right. So Kiman, what is this going like? So Rashi interprets this in two possible ways. So the first way is that it means, where is Sumchus getting his view? The second interpretation Rashi says is that it means, where is Abaye getting this view? But Kihaitana, as it says in the following Tosefta, or it says Ditznan, as it says. I'm sorry, Tana, as it says in the Mishnah. Shetiva erev mitame benega'im miyad divrei Rebbe Meir. According to Rebbe Meir, as soon as you have the strings of the Shetiva Erev, you have the strings that are ready for weaving as the vertical strings and the horizontal strings. As soon as you have that in place, it is already Mekabel Tum'ah, it's already capable of receiving Tum'ah at that stage. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hasheti Mishi Shaleh, Va'erev Miyad, that it depends.
The machine when you have...
Yeah, they didn't have sewing machines back then, but yeah.
What?
They didn't have the same sewing machines that we have now, but yeah, there's two different directions. One is crossing vertically, and one stays still, and the other one crosses through. Okay, so the sheti string is after it's boiled. They would boil it in liquid, I guess, to make it softer, because that was the one that actually they would thread through. It needed to be a little bit softer to be able to be threaded through. Whereas the erev immediately, the one that stays stationary. Okay, that one would be, immediately when it's ready to be used is when it's processed. You don't need anything more than that because it doesn't have to move, so it doesn't have to be as soft. And when you have pishtan, when you have unin shel pishtan, you have these bundles of flax. As soon as they're whitened in the oven, they're already mekabel tumah, because in that state is where they can be used. So what do we see from this Mishnah? We see from this Mishnah, from Rabbi Yehuda, that when it comes to the pishtan, when it comes to the flax, as soon as it is ready to be used as a string, it's already mekabel tum'ah, and that is why we say that Sumchus and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar are both going to say that you can't use these flax strings immediately, even before they've been sort of made, softened or anything else. Nothing else has to be done with them to make them subject to the tum'ah of tzara'at. Now we learned just the beginning of the next Mishnah. Kol yotzim min ha'etz en madlikin bo l'pishtan. We know this from Bameh Madlikin. Of course, we read every Shabbat. Anything that comes from the tree you can't use except for pishtan. You can only use a linen wick. And nothing that comes from a tree is subject to tumat oalim, which means.
It's okay, but minaet, that's more. That's so low.
What do you mean? That's for oils. Now we're talking about wicks. The wick.
Oh, the wick.
Yeah, the wick. So, minalan de pishtan ikre etz. Why is it that flax is considered a tree? Flax is not really a tree. It's a plant. It's a plant, right? So why is it called a tree? Because Amar Mar Zutra de Amar Kra. What is this from? This is from Sefer Yoshua. When Yoshua sends Miraglim. And they come to the house of Rachav, and Rachav covers them with pishtan. She covers them with flax, because the guards of the king of Yericho come to try to find them, and she protects them on the roof. Elata magaga, she put them up in the roof, but titmenem b'pishtei ha'etz, and she covered them with pishtei ha'etz. So it calls pishtim, it calls flax pishtei ha'etz, meaning that they come from a tree, and that's why pishtan is considered a tree based upon what it's described as in Sefer Yoshua. So that concludes our daf for today.